Hello, good morning. Today our guest is Dr. Benjamin Harold. Hello, Benjamin. How are you doing?
Hello, Lipton. I'm doing great. Nice to meet you.
I'm great too, Benjamin. I like that you're so ebullient. It's good when my guests are energetic. I trust that we're going to have a brilliant conversation. Benjamin, we have some commonalities. The first commonality is this, Benjamin. Before I became interested in research, I assumed that teacher quality really mattered. And that finding was corroborated by you in your paper. And guess who read it? Guess me.
That
Yes,
that's great. Yeah.
yes. The paper is titled Genetic Endowments, Educational Outcomes, and the Mediating Influence of School Investments. Benjamin, what motivated this research?
Yes, our research was motivated by the finding that teacher quality is important for students. This has been shown before, and as you said, it was your intuition as well. There's influential research in the economics of education, for example, that high quality teachers are one of the most important input factor for students in the production of educational outcomes, as we economists call it. So, for example, in allowing students to have high student test scores. Now, in our paper, we asked the question, which types of students benefit over proportionally? And more specifically to your question, we noticed that in biology, in particular in molecular biology, progress has been made to identify advantaged and disadvantaged students. And we wanted to bring these two literatures together, the biological literature and the education literature, to understand which students benefit most from high quality teachers.
And what are your findings?
Yes, so our finding is that, first of all, good teachers are good for students. That's trivial. We had known this before. Second, we see that students with a high genetic predisposition for educational success also are more likely to have more educational success. That we also knew before. And now our finding is that the interaction effect between the two is negative. So school quality or teacher quality and genetic endowments act as substitutes. What does this mean? It means that um, all students benefit from better teachers, but those with a low genetic predisposition for educational success benefit over proportionally. That's the headline finding of our study.
Great. Benjamin, your school shatters the pieties of egalitarianism. Education is important, but we must appreciate the distinction between education and human capital. Intelligent teachers with expertise have human capital to transmit. They have skills. They know how to teach. Some acquired experience in the private sector, therefore, they can offer advice to students. Teachers who are not as intelligent and teachers with lower levels of human capital will be less effective. So if your student is studying physics and he wants to become an engineer and you worked at Google, as a former executive, you're in a position to transmit human capital to that student. You have an actual skill. You know how to make a product, you know how to commercialize a product. And that's why so many schools are failing because lower quality people become teachers. Education graduates have lower cognitive scores. We have really good data from people like Wolfram on the IQs of various professions. Teachers are not the brightest of the group. Countries like Finland and Singapore, they do well. Why do they do well? They are high IQ countries, but they also recruit smarter teachers.
Yes.
And yeah, it's for some people, it sounds a bit depressing because we're basically saying that low IQ students don't have a future because on average, the typical teacher is not a high quality individual. But that's the problem. That's the reality. We have to recruit more people into teaching who can transmit human capital. But at the same time, we don't want to divert too much capital away from the private sector.
Yes, I agree with this statement. It's true in countries like Finland and like Singapore, countries that typically ho score highly on the PISA test, for example, or in educational achievement tests. We see that the selection into the teaching professions is different from many other countries. In those countries that you named, teachers from the top end of the ability distribution are more likely to become teachers relative to other countries. So in Finland, that's the example that you gave. There's a saying that those people become doctors and computer scientists who did not manage to become teachers. That's maybe quite different from, say, from Germany, where I come from, where typically the reputation, maybe also the financial income of teachers, is not reflecting any top position in the distribution. So I agree with you. It's a policy goal to attract brightest of the bright into the teaching professions, because at least across generation, it's a sort of multiplier. If you have a very good teacher, that ability of the good teacher can be multiplied through the education experience of students. Of course, you're right, that also comes at an opportunity cost, right? So if the brightest of the bright are becoming teachers, well, we also need good doctors, we also need good computer scientists. So I'm not advocating that each and everyone should become a good teacher. But what I'm advocating for is the teaching profession is becoming as reputed and also as financially rewarding, at least as, say, doctors or computer specialists, because as you say, and I agree with you, we need the best people to also consider the teaching profession.
Benjamin, how is research of this nature conducted? So on this show, we really emphasize distilling complicated ideas so that people can appreciate them. Polygenic scores, I posed that question to other researchers already, so I'm not going to ask you what's a polygenic score, but are polygenic scores useful? What exactly do they measure? When we say that educational attainment is 95 because of the polygenic score, what are we really saying? Genes are associated with intelligence. We have yet to isolate the effects of specific genes. We know that genes are associated with intelligence. There's a new study looking at this relationship in molecular psychiatry. But what is educational attainment measuring really? How do polygenic scores work? What do you do? Do you look at the research and say, okay, so this person has gene BB2 and he has a bachelor's degree and his brother has a bachelor's degree. So we're going to give this gene 10 marks. How does it really work?
The example that you gave goes in the right direction, but it's a little bit more complex than that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think a good starting point to think about these genome-wide association studies is to ask, what did we have before, and then we can contrast it. Okay. So what we had before was so-called candidate gene studies, where we had an idea, maybe coming from medicine, that a certain gene might be important for the expression of a certain phenotype. So a certain genotype affects a certain phenotype, right? You knew that certain genes might be relevant for, say, the quality of the eyesight or these type of things. However, this was very limited, especially because so many traits that we typically care about, and that includes education, depend on so many genes and so many environmental factors at the same time. So just focusing on a specific base pair combination, right? The DNA consists of base pairs. That's likely not enough. Um, what then happened is that the human genome was sequenced. It happened for the first time in 2001. Well, for the first time ever, a human genome was fully sequenced. Now, one human being, one genome is not enough. But in the subsequent years, so-called biobanks emerged. The UK Biobank, for example, I hear that you're currently in Scotland, so the UK Biobank is one that's relevant for the UK, where we have more and more genetic information from more and more people. And what we also have is information on their lives coming from surveys. For example, we know something about their educational success. And then what these genome-wide association studies do is they put together in a complete a-theoretical approach all the different DNA-based information called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, but it doesn't really matter. It's like the base pairs of the DNA where we human beings differ, essentially. Put all of them into a regression and regress this on the outcome of interests. So there's genome-wide association studies were originally done maybe for the probability, say, to smoke or to suffer from a certain disease. But this could also be used for educational attainment. And so in an a-theoretical, purely empirical way, it creates correlations, not causality. That's something we can come back to in a minute if you're interested. It creates correlations between the genetic endowment of human beings and their educational success.
Okay. I am interested in this line of research because the critics argue from two separate angles. There's this retired academic who is really controversial. We correspond via email. And his opinion is that polygenic research is a dead end. And there are critics who contend that polygenic research does not tell us much about differences in intelligence because these genes may not co-vary across race. In other words, do genes that predict intelligence in Blacks and Europeans also predict intelligence in Asians? And most of these studies analyze European data sets. So the argument is that the genes do not co-vary across racial traits. Even though there's a study that was published online recently by Asian researchers, it's quite complicated. I believe it was published by one of the Nature journals, and that article found some similarities across race, but it's not conclusive. It's a recent study. But what's your position based on the available evidence?
Yes, so it's true for most studies and also for our study that we focus on a sample of people that have European ancestry. The reason for this is that that's the information on which these large-scale genome-wide association studies were trained, because that's where the people that are present in the biobanks come from, typically. Now, that's a problem. I agree with the critique to some extent. So of course, if we literally interpret our findings in a narrow sense, we only make claims for people of European descent. This raises the question of external validity. What about other races? We equally want to know how they are affected, say, by certain educational environments, say, by good teachers. So in that sense, I think that's a call for future research. First of all, from the biological side, we need broader biobanks. We need genome-wide association studies that are run on samples of people with ancestry of different races and ethnicities in order to learn more. Now, of course, do I expect to change that the results would fundamentally change? Probably not, because after all, we are still human beings. The large share of genetic endowments across races we share, right? There are differences, but they are not that large. Most of the things across people of different races are the same. So I would expect that results do not look too different. And you just mentioned one study, right, that makes this Asian comparison
Yes,
that already points in this direction. Probably the differences are not going to be that large. But I also want to see more research in this direction. And I think that's also where the profession will be heading, is to have a more diverse and integrated samples to conduct these studies.
because genes have great predictive value. Polygenic scores that predict educational attainment also predict financial literacy. That's one area of research that needs further study, the link between genes and investments. What do you think? You're an economist, so I'm sure you're interested in this line of research.
Yes, you're right. I absolutely am, and I agree with you. Yes, that's interesting. Now, of course, to run a certain genome-wide association study in order to come up with a given polygenic score for an outcome of interest, that could be financial literacy, for example, or that could be education, we need large amounts of data. And yes, we want to know, as researcher, I want to know more. I want to have a broader set of polygenic scores for different traits, for different phenotypes, not only education, also financial literacy, also many other outcomes. Um, of course, having said this, I think what we do in our paper to start with a general measure of education is a decent start, because the overall, so what we have an outcome variable is educational attainment. Um, and that's a very general outcome for human development, right? Of course, we can say, okay, we focus on financial literacy, or we focus on the ability to solve certain math problems, or we focus on, say, historic understanding of the world, right? Of course, we could go more fine-grained, and yes, I want to see that in the future, but I think it wouldn't have been the best starting point, because for the starting point, I want to know the general outcome, the headline outcome, which I view as education in general. And then in the future, we can dig deeper. We can go into financial literacy, as you suggest. And yeah, I'd be super interested in learning more about this.
And how are these data sets designed? And I'm talking about the UK Biobank. What is the UK Biobank? And how did you access the data to conduct your research?
Yes. So that's a little bit complicated because we use data, we use insights that's based on these biobanks, but then we also use American data from the so-called Ad Health data. Let me explain this a little bit. Yeah. So first of all, what are biobanks? Biobanks essentially are large databases, if you want, that store information of the human genome of different individuals. Over time, they have been increasing. As I said, in 2001, it was the start. That was not the year in which the biobanks were founded. That came in the following years, and more people have been and are still being added today to these biobanks. And what we also have is some information of these individuals, typically coming from survey data about their lives. Are they married or not? Are they healthy or not? If not, along which dimensions are they not healthy? Some basic information about educational attainment as well. So what we can do is to train these models to tell us which um, parts of the human genome are predictive of the outcome in question. Okay? That we can still do within the biobanks. And from this, we can take a polygenic score that's based on millions of observations, millions of human beings, that tells us, given the DNA of a human being, how predictive is that DNA of an outcome in question, for example, of educational success. Now, in our study, we need much more information about the environment of the individuals, right? We are not only interested in the educational level, we need to know when did they go to school and where and how were the teachers back then. And of course, we need to control for many other things, right? For example, we have an analysis that looks at a within sibling comparison to control for a wide range of environmental factors. We want to know something about the teachers. What makes a good teacher? That's not so clear a priori, right? So we want to know which credentials do they have, which academic degrees do they have, how much experience do they have in teaching, and a number of other information of the teachers. So in some sense, this comprehensive information is not available in the biobanks, okay? In the biobanks, we have millions of individuals, but we don't know about the teacher credentials of each and every individual in the biobank. Okay, so what we do in our research is essentially we take the insight of the UK Biobank, which is the polygenic score. We take this to our data. We do not train our model with our information. In our data, in the Ad Health data, we have around 5,000 individuals. We cannot train a fully fledged genome-wide association study with 5,000 individuals. That's just not enough. But we can take whatever has been trained in the biobanks, just plug it in our analysis, And then in our analysis, in our data, we can map that with the broader information that we have about the teachers. So in some sense, we extract information from the biobanks, integrate it into our analysis. Therefore, we do not run the genome-wide association studies ourselves. That's essentially what the biologists do in the biobanks. We as economists just use the insight from these studies and map it to more comprehensive information than what would have been possible in the biobanks, for example, about the teacher environment.
Benjamin, how do you feel if I say that economists are doing the best genetic studies? Well, that's not just an observation, it's the truth. What I like is that the implications of these studies are really controversial. The people conducting the studies are not politically aligned, but for some strange reason, they don't make news, which could be good. Because if they were making news, that would lead to backlash, and then backlash would suppress the findings. But economists have been doing some really transformational studies, especially in the arena of genes and financial literacy and social mobility. And know yourself, genes and the academic performance of low IQ students. I don't think that psychologists would have gotten away with doing this type of research. Benjamin, do schools matter? Based on what we know about genes and the quality of teachers and the fact that most teachers are not high quality people, do schools really matter? Are we wasting money by investing in mass education? Should we all follow the German model where if you want to become a plumber, there's an institution that cater to your needs? I think that's a more suitable model. It even exists in Singapore. So Singapore is elitist, but there are several students in Singapore who have strong spatial skills. So after primary school, they attend a comprehensive institute and then graduate and get a job in the private sector. I think that's a more useful model. So what should our approach to education be in the context of the genetic revolution?
Yes. So overall, I would say yes, schools matter, but not each school type is good and suitable for each and every student. So in most countries, we have some degree of differentiation, right? Like typically all students of one cohort enter in an elementary school, there's no differentiation. And at some point, and we start typically with tracking, meaning that some students go to a higher track school and some other students go to a lower track school, right? And it goes on and on through the education cycle. So those who go to the higher track school typically then get the permission to study at a university. But of course, this then really depends a bit on the country, how exactly this looks like. And in Germany, as you raised this example, we have this dual system, which means that for some degrees, you go to university, right? If you want to become a researcher, for example, you have to attend university. But for some other professions, for example, the plumber that you named, you typically can leave school relatively early and do an apprenticeship afterwards. So you go to school maybe until grade 8 or grade 9, a rather lower track school, and then you do an apprenticeship that may take another 2 years or 3 years, and then you can already start working as a plumber yourself. So I think what we have here is a differentiation based on the skills that students need. Now my opinion is that it's good to give all students at least some basic skills. Because we live in times that are rapidly changing.
Yes, they need
Also
to
with
learn how to write well. They need to
yes,
learn calculation. So mathematics and English are important up to grade 7, 8, and 9, but their emphasis should be on plumbing and welding. And guess what? Some plumbers out earn professionals. It's not
yeah,
impossible. There are welders who out earn professionals. On average, high level professionals will earn more than plumbers, but one can live a relatively decent life as a plumber. And if you earn enough as a plumber, your children could be exposed to a more enriching environment so they can become lawyers and doctors. And some of these people might want to become carpenters rather than doctors. So we need to create opportunities for choice rather than wasting money on mass education, because that's what we're really doing. We're clogging up the system with students who don't want to be in school. Their IQs predict that they will not be good students, and then they graduate at 17 or 19 as inefficient young people. They don't have a skill, they don't know what they want to do. And I'm from Jamaica, where it's even worse. For years, our records were showing that students spent 5 years in school. They could not read, they could not write. Where the country has over 160. Yeah, Benjamin, hold on for a second, people.
Yeah. Uh,
The
isn't, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. So that the internet was giving a problem. I really don't like when it acts
Yeah.
like this. But yeah, so I'm from Jamaica, and our education
Mhm.
system is basically a failure. I won't even bother to go to the Gleaner to read the findings presented in the editorial. We have known this for years, and it is failing because of the model. We're not following the German model or even the Singaporean model. So these students are not prepared for school. They graduate, and there is what I call the pipeline. So there's the pipeline from the failing schools to criminality. And yes, the Ministry of Education some years ago identified some schools as producing criminals. So the failing school to criminality culture. When those people don't need to become criminals, just reorient the education system so that they can become productive people.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like with a small caveat think individuals are not properly trained. But if that's the case, um, I agree with you. Important. Also for those who say don't go to the hype, societies like Germany and maybe also for Jamaica, is adulthood education,
Benjamin,
re-education, artificial.
hold on,
Yes.
Benjamin. You're saying that you agree with me, but there was an extra point. Repeat all of that sentence because again the internet was being annoying. So you're saying
Oh
you
yeah.
agree with me, but there's a caveat. Yeah, continue.
Say again. Where should I
You
continue?
agree with me, but there's a caveat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, continue.
Yes, yes. So I agree that differentiation is important, on condition that all students get universal basic skills. Um, we need to have at least as much education for everyone, that's granted, because this will be needed also potentially for re-education during adulthood. We live in times of automation. We live in times where artificial intelligence may take over some professions. Right, robots are being built. Jobs that have been relevant 30 years ago are not relevant anymore these days. And so I think what's important is that these individuals are put in a position where even as adults, they have the chance to learn a new profession, to learn something else. And in order to achieve that, we need to have universal basic skills, the math, the English, the writing. So I think that's important. But if that's provided, yes, then I think differentiation makes a lot of sense.
I agree. So Benjamin, this is the name of the study I referenced earlier. It's titled Share Genetic Architectures of Educational Attainment in East Asian and European Populations. Polygenic prediction analysis in 4 independent EAS and EUR cohorts demonstrated transferability between populations. Our study supports the need for further research on diverse ancestries to increase our understanding of the genetic basis of educational attainment. Edu years showed a high genetic correlation and power adjusted transferability ratio between EAS and EUR, East Asia and Europe. We also found similar functional enrichment, gene expression enrichment, and cross-trait genetic correlations between two populations. So there's the evidence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you for reading that. Yes, I think that goes in line with what I said before, right? It's likely that there's some external validity across races and ethnicities because we as human beings are not that different from another. Still, there are some differences, and of course, we also live in different environments. So we want to see these studies, and that's a nice start. And I expect to see more of this in the future.
Will you, but okay, you have a PhD, you're going to start a job at a prominent university in the UK, right? And I'm
Yes,
happy for you. And I would rather
thank
to
you.
not call the name of that university. I have my reasons, but is that an appropriate place? It looks good on your CV, but that university has not been receptive to controversial research on genetics.
Of course, I mean, I speak on or will speak on behalf of the economics department. I
Yes,
think the
yes,
criticism that you have in mind probably applies to different departments.
yes.
So, I mean, in general, yes, I think the UK is a great place to conduct studies. The data infrastructure is very well suited to conduct these type of studies. And I'm talking both about the data access and availability, and also about computational resources, meaning servers that can conduct complex calculations in a fast amount of
And
time.
you're from Germany, right?
Yes, that's correct. I come from Munich, Germany, and right now I
Okay,
work at ETH Zurich in Switzerland.
okay. I love German. The Germans do some really brilliant research. Like I think Germans are so smart. Like if I were not a Jamaican, I would have been a German.
That's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure not everyone is smart here, and
Obviously not, but
there's
the
exceptions.
Germans do the best research. Like I love German researchers. There's this one, he's a developmental psychologist. I just love his research. My one of my favorite political philosophers was born in Germany. Like
Who
I
was it?
really the philosopher?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, Paul Gottfried was born in Germany. He's Jewish.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and George Husterdikov is the developmental psychologist, who's also a German.
Yeah. No, yeah, thank you for the kind assessment.
Yeah.
Well, you should come to Germany. We would love to have you. We
Yeah,
always need
yeah, I would
brilliant
love
and engaged
to
minds.
yeah, yeah, I would love to go to Germany. But this is the next point I want us to make. I call it genetic inequality and the free market.
Mhm.
Because the beauty of the free market is that you don't need to be a genius to succeed. The smartest people, like billionaires, tend to have IIQs according to research of people like Rinderman. But you don't need to be a genius to be rich because the free market is so diverse because our needs are unlimited. So when I read data on genetic inequality, I'm not upset because the scope of opportunities is so great. And I think this is where the discussion needs to head rather than discussing racial or cultural differences in performance, look at absolute measures. So in America, most Blacks are not poor. So it really doesn't matter that on average they're not as rich as whites or East Asian. Most Blacks are not poor. Most people in America are not poor. And America is the number one redistributive state in the world. It's not Scandinavian country, it's America. So if we were to truly maximize the potential of genetic equality, I think growth would be enhanced. Because if my genetic potential is spatial ability and being a plumber or carpenter, I'm going to divert resources into that area, create employment if I'm really talented, make money and enrich society. Whereas if I stay in school, I might fail or become a pencil pusher. So we need to talk about genetic inequality and the free market. They complement each other.
Yes, they do. Excuse me. Yes, they do. I believe it's about the right combination of free market, but also of a government that does the right things at the right point in time. So we have genetic inequality. We also have environmental inequality. Um, and I think what genetic inequality defines is the potential that individuals have. And in order to reap their potentials, on the one hand, we need some free market elements, right? We want to have a free market, for example, with regards to occupational choice, right? We have different abilities, we have different talents. Not everyone has to become a doctor, not everyone has to become a plumber. We want a free market where people have the liberty to choose their own profession, for example. At the same time, we need a public system, for example, a public school system that supports student in achieving their goals, right? If you went only free market and would, for example, also only do a fully free market education system, we might end up a situation where high ability children with low financial backgrounds do not get the education that would maximize their potential. So I think it's about the right combination between free market and public supported systems.
Yeah, plumbers, they're okay. We need them. I won't discredit the efficacy of any profession. When you're ill, you go to the doctor. When your toilet is clogged up, you call the plumber.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. It's true. And the problem is sometimes that reputation does not go hand in hand with the necessity of having a certain of having people who are part of a certain profession. Yeah.
Yeah. What does plumber? No, no, I keep fixating on that word because I have a lisp and a minor speech impediment. So I was actually just looking at the proper pronunciation. Sometimes I forget it. That's why I kept mentioning the term. So
Yeah.
when I'm here and we're speaking, I'm also on Google because I wanted to retrieve the name of that study.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people might ask for it. A lot of people are unfamiliar with the study. So I wanted to retrieve the name. How do you pronounce this word? I'm from an English speaking country. It's in Germany. Bremen. How do you pronounce it?
B-E-R. Say
No,
again.
BRE. It is Bremen. Bremen is a state in Germany.
Ah,
BR.
Bayern. Yes.
Oh, that's how it's pronounced. Not Bremen. It's Bayern
Ah, sorry, you said Bremen. Sorry, I
or
misunderstood you.
Bremen. It's
Yeah,
Bremen.
it
Okay.
yes, it's
All right.
Bremen. Yes.
So you know
Yes.
what? I'm going to close this link and send you another link, and we're going to speak for a few more minutes.
Yes. Sounds great.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.